having government be able to enter your bedroom, enter your marriage, it's very invasive.
Why would someone be arrested for having sex in their home? And by reading this statute, it makes it sound like being gay is still a crime. And that's false, it's misleading.
What do we want? Trans rights! Why do we want it? Now! When trans people are under attack, what do we do? When trans rights are under attack,
Advocacy groups track those numbers, the only comprehensive data we've found, and cross-reference with bills here at the Texas State Capitol. Some policies passed, including one to prevent some medical treatment for transgender children.
Sometimes we must work hard against something in order to fight for something. SB 14 fights to stop puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and mutilating surgeries.
This bill does the wrong thing.
Let go of me now!
He's not doing anything. He's not resisting.
If you're too loud, they cannot conduct business. If you do not
Hey, that's my friend. That's my friend. Leave him alone. That's my friend. Get your hands off of him.
Another bill that passed would ban books mentioning LGBTQ+ topics in public schools.
Make no mistake, this is censorship and this is book banning.
Sexually explicit content has no place in schools.
And lawmakers passed another bill to prevent some performances opponents worry could include drag shows.
These bills discriminate against people based on sex and not the actual content of performances.
It's ridiculous. Leave the children out of it.
the fact that you would consider this bill proves that you are the threat to the children of Texas.
Thank you for your testimony.
How dare you sit before us and ignore the very real evidence
Thank you for your
that Texans have brought to you.
In testimony and debate, protests, and even legislation, there were references to a piece of history, a controversial measure some say helped spark the latest proposals. A state law created 50 years ago, outlawing homosexual conduct in Texas.
Course materials and instruction must state that homosexual conduct is not an acceptable lifestyle and is a criminal offense under the Penal Code.
Does Texas Values believe that an individual who engages in homosexual conduct is a criminal and should be a criminal under Texas law?
And of course, our position is that that goes against the values of our organization.
Texas enacted its first sodomy law in 1860, banning what was labeled this abominable and detestable crime for anyone. A review of news archives and court reports over the next century show the law was largely used to criminalize behavior between gay men.
After we have heard all the evidence on the Penal Code, the subcommittee then tried to report a bill.
Then in 1973, state leaders overhauled the Penal Code, which holds every criminal law in Texas. And in doing so, they narrowed the sodomy law to only apply to homosexual conduct, Section 21.06, essentially targeting only gay sex.
We've tried to take into consideration the needs of everyone, and I certainly hope that this will go right through the Senate, and I think we'll have one of the best penal codes in the country if it does.
I'd like to object to the inclusion of Section 2106.
Threatens with arrest a large section of the Texas population for living normal lives.
Homosexual women and men whose only crime is in loving I'd like to welcome everyone to the Committee on Criminal Jurisprudence.
We'll lay out House Bill 687.
Tell me how you got interested in starting to file legislation that would have repealed 21.06 on the Penal Code.
I actually knew people who were being discriminated against in a number of different ways. There would be times when people wouldn't be able to get jobs and apartment applications. It just seemed like the right thing to do, to take it off the books. It was on its face unfair. For people who are homosexual, this happens on a real regular basis. We had a really, really activist office. Every session I'd carry dozens and dozens and dozens of bills. My first session was 1981.
How long were you in the legislature?
A little over 2 decades. I filed it every session. It repeals the section that makes homosexual sodomy illegal. 2106 is a Class C misdemeanor.
What's the penalty range for a Class C misdemeanor?
If you were in my county, it could be hanging.
Mr. Chisholm,
probably,
do you not
probably
know?
$500 in this county, but that's all right. And they probably would hang you for doing this in my county if they caught you.
Why do you feel like the bill never got to the point where it got a final vote and went to the governor's desk?
It was still very controversial in Texas. Legally, I think it was a bill whose time had not come. Certainly, we brought in very, very effective witnesses, made our case very well. The witness I've asked you to call is Mitchell Katine. He is the attorney in the case that y'all have all heard about.
I am one of the attorneys for John Lawrence and Tyrone Gardner. When I received a call in 1998 asking if I would handle this case, I didn't believe it because I had never heard of anybody being arrested and put in jail for homosexual conduct.
What did Harris County deputies say happened that night?
Deputies said that they received a call that there was a man with a gun in the apartment. When they arrived on the scene, they entered the apartment with their guns drawn, and according to their sworn statement, they observed John and Tyrone in the bedroom.
I responded along with several other deputies. I'm the first one in, and I looked down to my left, 2 men having sexual intercourse.
With the police report, you're listed as a witness on it.
Yes, sir.
And it says specifically that the defendants were engaged in deviant sexual conduct.
Yes. I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm thinking to myself, you know what? These are 2 grown adults. What they do in the privacy of their own home is their business.
When you heard that they were going to be charged with homosexual conduct, what did you think about that?
You know, so I didn't agree with it, but it's the law, so I'm gonna do my job.
I tried calling John Lawrence. I said, John, you don't know me, but I'm a gay activist in Houston. I want to talk to you about your arrest. I think we have a Supreme Court case. I think we can take homosexuality as being illegal off the books, and I think you can help me do that. I want to find you a lawyer.
It was personal for me. I was a young, new gay lawyer. I had graduated from law school and wanted to help my community. This hit the news. Most people were outraged, straight and gay, from all over the world. I was getting phone calls saying, is this real? Did this really happen?
I said, guys, the whole country's going to know who you are. Your name is going to be in the paper. Your pictures will be in the paper.
We'll hear argument next in number 02102, John Geddes Lawrence and Tyrone Garner versus Texas.
The state of Texas in this case claims that there's no constitutional problem raised by a criminal statute that is directed not just at conduct, but at a particular group of people, a law that criminalizes forms of sexual intimacy only for same-sex couples.
The state of Texas is asking this court to be mindful of the far-reaching aspects of your decision in this case. Under the equal protection argument, Texas has the right to set moral standards for its people.
So these are my files from the Lawrence case, and most legal scholars will tell you your chance of going to the Supreme Court, don't bank on that, because really good cases often don't make it there, let alone win. We'll win with a 6-3 decision. That was amazing.
The judgment of the Court of Appeals for the Texas 14th District is reversed.
And it changed things beyond Texas.
First of all, it changed 13 states. 13 states had sodomy statutes on the books when Lawrence v. Texas came out. As Justice Kennedy said, moral disapproval is not enough for a criminal statute. Just because you don't like it doesn't mean you should have a criminal law making it a crime.
The petitioners are entitled to respect for their private lives. The state cannot demean their existence or control their destiny by making their private sexual conduct a crime.
That language has been used by the Supreme Court for gay marriage, for protection from employment discrimination.
Our obligation is to define the liberty of all, not to mandate our own moral code.
So this photo was taken right outside the very first hearing. That's Mitchell, Tyrone, John Lawrence, and then you have me on the end.
What you told Mr. Lawrence and Mr. Garner that this was going to be a Supreme Court case ended up being true.
They were thrown into it. They weren't activists. They had absolutely no motivation to be in this fight other than that they were angry, they were humiliated. These guys could have said no at any time, and they didn't.
Due to health issues, both John and Tyrone have passed away.
All these years later, is there anything, if you could speak to them now, that you would like to tell them?
Yeah, if you give me a second. If they were still around today, and the most obvious answer would be thank you.
Their legacy lives on for the equal treatment of all people that may be disfavored in the majority's eyes.
"20 years later, the law is still on the Texas books.
Why else would you keep a law on the books that's no longer valid? It's to send a message.
It was always there just to be as a symbol of hatred, a symbol of discontent. It was symbolic then, it's symbolic now.
Are there any examples of this law being enforced after the Supreme Court declared it unconstitutional?
Two gentlemen kissed each other in an El Paso restaurant, and the manager saw that and said, "Hey, cut out that activity. You can't do that here."
When the law was in effect, violating it was a Class C misdemeanor, but tracking the number of times it's been used or misused after the Lawrence v. Texas decision is tough. One reason, the state only requires the municipal courts to hold on to criminal records for 5 years. After a search of the 10 most populous counties statewide, we did find a few instances though, including a high-profile case out of El Paso in 2009.
What is your emergency?
Because we came to eat, and a couple that's with us, they're two males, and they're boyfriends, and they're kissing, and they're kicking us out.
And when the police came, the police officer said, "Well, General, don't y'all know I'm going to arrest you for homosexual conduct. That's against the law."
They're saying that it's a law that you can't be doing that in public. I do think it's a little discrimination.
The homosexual conduct in that particular case was two men kissing. So I think you've got a problem with people just not understanding what's going on.
Not only is the continued existence of this law on the books a source of misinformation to law enforcement,
but in my own district, local governments have been forced to expend their limited resources due to this misuse.
The city of El Paso settled a lawsuit about this.
Yes, they did. They spent a lot of money.
We did.
Went all the way up to the El Paso Court of Appeals.
So we actually have an example of taxpayer dollars being totally wasted.
Was unconstitutional and unenforceable, yet here it was being cited by police.
You know, I'm not proud of what happened for our community. I think it was a black eye to the community.
I do believe that there is some much needed education on what's going on and, so it doesn't happen again.
The city settled and police had to be retrained on the law. How have those steps helped?
Part of the remedy after the incident took place was education of the law enforcement officials to let them know what was appropriate.
You introduced a resolution, and what did that do?
So basically the resolution is just a statement by the city council of this is what we stand for. Whereas the city of El Paso fully supports and endorses the 2003 United States Supreme Court decision in Lawrence versus Texas, the city of El Paso firmly rejects acts of discrimination, intolerance, and bigotry.
All these years later, what's changed?
As a matter of fact, the city flies out pride colors. The leading institutions in the community have pride recognition. I think the climate is better, but you still have rhetoric. You see how history repeats itself.
Chair calls Megan Behoon.
I'm here today to speak in favor of House Bill 2055, which seeks to remove unconstitutional language from Texas Penal Code. As a queer Texan, this section of Texas Penal Code has been a constant fixture of confusion, difficulty, and frankly, wasted time.
Megan, thank you. I can say from experience in El Paso, our city faced a lawsuit over the confusion and misapplication of this.
My entire life is in boxes, and all the things that make this my home are already gone. I am a non-binary intersex person. As a teenager in Texas, I was most readily identifiable as a lesbian. I'm old enough that I had this section of code wielded against me for simply existing in public with my girlfriend. I received citations for simply walking down the street holding her hand. It said that we were being cited for violating public decency and sodomy laws. We weren't making out on the street or anything else.
You've also had difficulty with a landlord.
I have had well-intended landlords who said they just didn't want to risk a crime being committed on the property, citing this section as recently as 2019. I mentioned my spouse, and the landlord then began to ask me questions about the gender of my spouse and what my identity was. She was concerned because that's illegal in Texas.
Even though the law isn't enforceable at this point.
It requires that you look at that actual section of code to see that it's declared unconstitutional. So a lot of people don't really understand that it's not enforceable. It is long past time to remove this language from the Texas Penal Code to protect Texans. I was encouraged by every member of my immediate family to not sit down and discuss this. We've had experiences where we've received death threats, and we shouldn't have to live in that kind of fear just to speak to things that should be part of standard everyday life.
In 2023, this bill, something proposed to protect LGBTQ+ Texans, was rare. Lawmakers also filed a record amount of legislation that would restrict this community. And even months after the session ended, uncertainty lingered, as some bills that passed were challenged in court. It's part of the reason why many in this community are choosing to leave the state.
Being pushed to a point where my family feels so unsafe that we need to leave again is a really difficult circumstance. There's a possibility of moving back, but it's going to require that we can be sure that my family is safe when we cross the state line, that when we land in the airport, that we are accepted for who we are.
House Bill 2055 by Representative Venton Jones relating to the repeal of the criminal offense of homosexual conduct.
It seems your testimony resonated with the committee members.
There were some surprises for me.
The chair moves that House Bill 2055 as substituted be reported favorably to the full House with the recommendation that it do pass and be printed. The clerk will call the roll.
Chair Moody,
Aye.
Vice Chair Cook,
Aye.
Representative Bajani.
There being 9 ayes and 0 nays, the motion prevails.
My name is Venton Jones, and I am a state representative in Dallas, Texas. I was born and raised in this neighborhood.
2023 was your first legislative session, right?
That's right.
The Committee on Criminal Jurisprudence will come to order. This time, Chair lays out House Bill 2055 by Representative Venton Jones and recognizes Mr. Jones.
This is a cleanup bill that would strike the unconstitutional language from Section 21.06 of the Penal Code put in place in 1973.
Let's see. 21.06, homosexual conduct. A person commits an offense if he engages in deviant sexual intercourse with another individual of the same sex. You still have instances where this law is being used to harass communities. It's laws like that that perpetuate that violence and the rhetoric that we heard towards the LGBTQ community.
A warning to anyone in the room due to the sexually explicit content that will be discussed here.
We may not win today, and we may not win tomorrow, but we will persist as we always have in the fight of your oppression. If you wish to eradicate transgenderism from the public life, as members of your party have said, to quote a few of yours, you can find that by cold dead hands.
What do we want? Trans rights! Why do we want it? Now!
I know that it's been said countless amounts of times. What's at stake in this 88th legislative session?
Keep your dirty hands off our kids! Out of the closet, into the street! Out of the closet, into the street! Our street! Our street!
Oh, let me introduce myself. Venton Jones, House District 100 in Dallas, but also a proud representative of this community.
I'm a Black gay man.
What was it like growing up gay in Texas?
It was challenging, but thankfully, one thing that Texas teaches you is to be strong.
Being a part of the LGBTQ community is not a crime.
What were you thinking when you stepped up to that podium?
As also being someone who this legislation would impact personally. And that really fueled my, ability to be able to lay out this bill in a way to where my colleagues heard me.
I don't believe that you or any members on this panel should be arrested for being with the person that you love.
One of the voices of opposition was a group called Texas Values. Texas Values says it is a faith and family-based organization.
Chair lays out House Bill 1848.
Texas Values in opposition to HB 1848.
Texas Values Action, here to testify against House Bill 978.
Texas Values Action, here to oppose HB 1038.
Texas Values declined an interview request, saying it was focused on more pressing issues. But our own legislative analysis found in the past decade, this group has been very focused on this measure, registering or testifying at least 17 times against different bills aimed at repealing the state's ban on homosexual conduct, far surpassing anyone else. Its argument, the legislation was always too broad.
Our main concern that we bring every year with this type of legislation is how it affects the Health and Safety Code, which has very important provisions on how we teach kids about sex.
Most legislative efforts, including Representative Jones's bill, have not only tried to repeal the state's ban on homosexual conduct, but also language referencing that law from a section of the Texas Health and Safety Code regarding teaching students about sex in school. That section states homosexuality is not a lifestyle acceptable to the general public and is a criminal offense.
The most important part is making sure that our kids have all the information that they need possible in order to make healthy decisions.
But like with Jones's bill, even when compromise kept the health code portion intact, Texas Values would not support repealing the ban on homosexual conduct.
There's different faith perspectives on all of these issues, but my question is very, very pointed and simple. Does Texas Values believe that an individual who engages in homosexual conduct is a criminal and should be a criminal under Texas law?
We do have to say that as an organization, we do not stand for that behavior.
And my greatest fear at this moment is that there may be another little girl or boy watching your testimony and think that there is something wrong with them for a trait that we can't change. I am a lesbian. Not because I choose to be, but because the God I believe in made me this way.
The law isn't meant to disparage or discourage anyone.
What's the factual reason that this book should tell me that my marriage to my wife is criminal?
We have gotten really good in this state about criminalizing behaviors that we may just disagree with. And I don't think that's the right course for this state. And so I just want us to think deeply as legislators before we ultimately vote on this.
For some legislators, that thought process might include the influence Texas Values can have on politics. Since its beginning in 2012, the group has received millions of dollars in contributions, but due to state and federal disclosure laws for nonprofits and campaigns, it's tough to tell exactly how that money was spent or who gave it. We do know Texas Values and its lobbying arm have endorsed conservative lawmakers, buying ads, and publishing faith and family scorecards, a major campaign tool in elections.
I proudly have those awards that I've received from Texas Value on my shelf here in my office in the Capitol, and you do great work.
When you look at the makeup of the committee that you were standing before, there were some pretty conservative members.
I think that that's why it's critical to be able to have an open door so that you can have those conversations.
There should be no reason that I shouldn't be treated just as equally as each and every one of you. And with that, I close. Thank you so much.
There being 9 ayes and 0 nays, the motion prevails.
And at the end of that process, not only did we have the unanimous support of the committee, we had over 76 lawmakers that had signed on to support this bill as it made its way to the House floor.
What ultimately happened? Why didn't it move further than that?
Well, unfortunately, by the time that this bill was placed on the House floor calendar, we had reached the deadline to hear House bills. So not only did this bill die at that time, but many other bills also did as well. Sometimes it has to go another session, and sometimes even another session. What I hope is that it continues to show how the needle is moving towards understanding.
Do you think that this law will ever come off the books in Texas?
You know, I'm not one to ever say never, and I think that it's important that our laws reflect our values of diversity, values of inclusion, values of all humans being created equal.
name is Dale Carpenter, and I'm a constitutional law professor at Southern Methodist University. I have a specialty in the First Amendment, freedom of speech, and religion, and also LGBT rights. Texas had had a law forbidding sodomy since roughly 1860. The law forbade sexual conduct in the nature of anal and oral sex, but in 1973, Texas passed this homosexual conduct law, and it limited the application of the law only to same-sex sexual conduct. That was the first time that had happened in history. The very existence of that law was used as a ground to discriminate against gay and lesbian people. Why? The conduct was so closely associated with the status that the one stood in for the other, and the lesson that this law taught to Texans in the late 20th century is that homosexuals were bad, they could be discriminated against, and it was okay to do so. I wrote a book called Flagrant Conduct, The Story of Lawrence versus Texas. It is really about the background of the lawsuit that produced Lawrence versus Texas, because all of these cases have a human dimension that's often lost in the dry pages of a Supreme Court opinion. On September 17th, 1998, you had two men who were actually arrested in their home, and they claimed John Lawrence and Tyrone Garner engaged in some kind of sexual act in violation of the homosexual conduct law. So they go up the levels. Ultimately, they make it to the Supreme Court, and that case was argued in 2003, and then the Supreme Court came down with this decision in which they actually overruled an earlier decision and said, the constitutional right to liberty protects people, especially adults, engaged in private consensual sexual activity. That was a major decision from the U.S. Supreme Court. There were still in place in 2003 13 sodomy laws in total throughout the United States. 9 of those 13 laws applied to opposite sex and same-sex couples. 4 of them, like the one in Texas, applied just to same-sex couples. All of those laws were unconstitutional as of that date. The effect was really huge on American law in general because it meant for the first time that gay people could claim some amount of equal citizenship in our society. And so, within a matter of months, actually, the Massachusetts Supreme Court approved for the very first time under a state constitutional provision same-sex marriage. And then after that, you had movement toward civil unions and recognition and marriage throughout the country. You had eventually the end of the don't ask, don't tell policy, the prohibition on gays in the military. All of this is really made possible only because gay people for the first time had been authoritatively declared by the Supreme Court to be entitled to a right to privacy and a right to autonomy in their personal lives. So when the Supreme Court strikes down a law as unconstitutional, that striking down is really kind of poetic license. It doesn't actually result in the law being stricken officially from the law books. So the law is there in place, it's there even today, and it can only be repealed by the state legislature. For those who support sodomy laws and support traditional sexual morality, it has a benefit as a symbolic gesture of traditional values. The message to the public that you shouldn't engage in that conduct, it's better not to do so, and it's immoral. So it's just a symbolic statement, and I think some people value that symbolism. If the U.S. Supreme Court were to reverse Lawrence versus Texas, that old law just lays there like an unused whip, and a prosecutor could potentially pick it up again and use it for enforcement purposes or for other kinds of discriminatory actions. Well, I think we've had an example of what would happen if, for example, in the case of abortion laws. Once Roe versus Wade was overruled by the United States Supreme Court in Dobbs in 2022, the Texas abortion law, it was argued, sprang back to life, even though it had been unconstitutional. The Supreme Court, again, in the Dobbs decision, held that 50 years of precedent could be swept aside and that the abortion right could be overruled. It was never stricken from the books, and so in theory it could be enforced again by prosecutors. The same kind of thing could happen to the state homosexual conduct law.